All right, so today we're here with John. John is a successful entrepreneur. He started his own company. And John, do you want to tell us a little bit about your story, when you started that, what gave you that inspiration?
I was a professor at the University of Mississippi, and I was working on neural networks and genetic algorithms, which are computer models of the way the brain works, and did a lot of research in that area. And there were a couple of finance professors in our department that came to me and my other business partner and said, hey, could we use these models to forecast real estate prices? And we thought, oh yeah, that'd be a great application of it. They had a large data set in Memphis, Tennessee, so we built some machine learning algorithms. We were very successful at predicting real estate prices, and then we went off to the Bank of America to sell these models, and it was kind of a neat trip. But what we found out was that they didn't do business in Memphis, for one. We thought we would be able to go there and get data from them and be able to use their data to build nationwide models. And we found out that at that period of time, most of the data in that industry was in file cabinets. And so on the plane on the way back, this is one of those pivot moments that you make. On the plane on the way back, we said, hey, if we could unlock that process, if we could turn people and paper into electronic bits, we could change the way that business is done, and we could gather the data that we need in order to build these models. And we ended up doing so well on kind of the pipes or infrastructure that we didn't, while once we built the data up, we did do a lot of modeling and predictive analytics, but we really changed the way that whole process works, and that's where we were successful more than what we'd started out initially wanting to do.
Right, that's really cool. So a pattern, we see with entrepreneurs a lot is that you see a demand, like, you obviously saw that there was a need for that, and then you kind of go for that. For you and that company, because that was a pretty big undertaking, I imagine, to do all that. What gave you the confidence that you would be able to execute and efficiently serve that demand or that need?
Well, I like to tell my students that luck favors the prepared mind, and we certainly were prepared for the opportunity. The timing was just right too. I mean, this was back in the '90s when HTML and the web was just getting started, and they developed a technology called XML, which was the extensible markup language, which allowed you to define your own tags in a web page. And we got the idea that, hey, if you can do that, why not present an appraisal report as a web page, basically, identifying the data within that page, separating that data from the way it was styled. And so we went to the Appraisal Institute, and we developed a data standard for the appraisal industry. We turned that over to the public domain, just to kind of set a standard, and then we built the infrastructure to be able to actually deliver on that to a lot of the banks. We saw the need, right? The technology was available at the time. It was a matter of recognizing that opportunity. Right. Like I said, we started out saying we're going to build intelligent models to forecast real estate, and we decided, really, what we really need to do is change the way that process works so that we can capture the data that we wanted.
Okay, that's really cool. So we have a lot of students that ask because we've seen the statistics. A majority of new ventures often fail. For you, what do you say to that, or what do you think? What do you think the reason for that is such a high percentage of ventures failing, and then why do you think yours was able to be successful?
Well, I think one of the major problems that organizations have is they're severely undercapitalized. And I happen to have a business partner that was was a genius at raising money. And we had no idea how much money we were going to need in order to make this happen. And so I think that you know, you had to work through those things. I don't know if you remember Apollo 13.
Yeah.
Yeah, the movie where they, you know, I mean, these guys are. In fact, I met Fred Hayes, who was one of the astronauts on Apollo 13, and we had him at one of our client conferences. What a fascinating guy. I mean, here's a guy that worked his whole career to land on the moon.
Right.
And he got up there and something failed in the lunar landing module, and they weren't able to land, right?
Right.
And so he's sitting there looking out the window at the moon, his lifetime goal, and he never got to achieve that. They made it back safely, but one of the lines I really loved from that movie was where the guy comes out and he goes, "Gentlemen, failure is not an option," right? And I think you kind of have to take that attitude a lot of times. You know, you do need to know when to walk away. You need to know when to pivot things. We realized early on that we didn't have the data to build the models that we wanted, and so we had to seize on the opportunity that was available at that time. But then it's a lot of work, and I was lucky to have business partners, especially one in particular, Bill Rayburn, that I feel like was the real rainmaker in our company.
Okay.
And you know, he had this attitude that he was not going to fail, and you know, I was grateful to have somebody like that that wasn't afraid.
Right.
Right. And I think that's what happens a lot of times is that we shrink from the opportunity in a way, right? That doesn't mean every deal you're going to do is going to work.
Right, for sure. Well, I mean, even for you guys, I understand that before you were paid, there was 5 years of work that you put into kind of building and working on this company. Would you mind talking a little bit about like what that was like?
I mean, you know, for 5 years, I mean, we had to raise $50 million before we made money. You know, and I think if that had been the option to start with, you know, where we said, this is how much money we're going to need to make this work, it probably would have scared us away.
Right.
You know, especially since we refinanced our houses, essentially. You know, I mean, we put our houses up for collateral to borrow the first money that we had. That was a scary thing to do. But, you know, in a way, it was scary, but we kind of knew, I mean, we don't want to fail, right? I mean, there'd be real consequences to that. And, you know, we just kept finding the money. I mean, it was, I think someday they'll write a book about the way Bill financed the company. You know, fascinating stories. I remember, you know, Jim Barksdale, who was the CEO of Netscape, was in our office, and he offered us $7 million. But he said
the company?
No, he offered to invest $7 million at a time we really needed money. And the only strings he put on it was he said, but you have to come back to me for future money. Well, given that we've raised $50 million, he would have owned our company before. Right. Right. And you know, my business partner had the guts to say, no, we can't do that. He turned him down. And you know, and then he found out there were a lot of high wealth individuals in Mississippi, and he basically went to them and said, hey, you sign notes at the bank, and we'll give you stock in our company for doing that. And then we were borrowing money at very, very decent rates. Most of the money we raised was that way, debt financing that was guaranteed by other individuals. You know, we ended up paying back the loans. Right. They ended up with stock in the company. They were very happy once we paid the loans back, right? But it was an interesting way to finance the company. But it was that kind of ingenuity, I think, that helped us. I do think, though, that people don't realize that that's one of the keys, really, getting the money. And you know, I can't take credit for that. I was a tech guy, right? And so you know, I tried to build the most robust and stable systems
Mm-hmm.
and design that we could, and the data standards that we developed were very important. The idea of having data-centric process, the idea of turning that paper into data,
Right.
that was critical to our success. So we all played a role.
Right.
My other business partners, Bob Dorsey and Dennis Tosh, they were brilliant guys, and it was a pleasure really to work with them. Having people that have complementary skills,
Uh-huh.
and that's part of what you need, right?
Right.
You need to find people that are different than you,
Right.
that have unique contributions.
Which is a theme I think I feel we hear a lot. I've heard from different entrepreneurs strong opinions on it. Like some people say, never take on partners because then you have to split ownership, and some people swear by it. You've obviously done quite well with the partner, with the partner situation. Do you feel that's because everyone brings more value to the table, or what do you think the major value of partnerships are?
I think that is the case, that you have unique skills. We were at the right place at the right time, right? We had the right people in place.
Right.
We looked at the problem different than people had in the past. Our thing to start with was we changed the way you think about collateral.
Right.
It's kind of interesting to look back and say we really did change the industry.
Mm-hmm.
Things are done different today than they were done before we were there.
Right.
And in fact, you can't even close a loan. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac will not buy a loan unless they have the data on the appraisal.
And that's supplied by your company.
I mean, we made that all possible, right?
Right. Okay.
Those documents weren't data-centric before.
Right.
And, they now require an appraisal score.
Mm-hmm.
Our company actually owned the patent on an appraisal score.
Oh, wow.
It was being in the right place, having the right opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of those opportunities that exist. You think about how many processes are bound by paper and people,
Right.
and how can you automate that, that value chain?
Mm-hmm.
You think about it. That's a value chain. Can you disintermediate that market?
Mm-hmm.
And can you bring technology to bear on problems that didn't seem like technology problems to begin with, right?
Right.
I mean, there's opportunities all over for things like that.
Along with those opportunities, what would you say, I don't know, maybe your number one piece of advice for students? Maybe this is their last semester. They have, 3 months to really focus down and study. Then they're either going into the workforce, they're going to go start their own company. What would be a piece of advice you would give them as they're getting ready to look at starting something that helped you maybe?
Well, I think that there was an article a while back that came out in the New York Times by a couple of law professors from Yale University, and they basically said there's three characteristics one is an overwhelming belief in yourself, right?
Okay.
This confidence. But then the second one actually was a feeling of inadequacy. And the third one was delayed gratification. And I think, we're a unique people in the LDS culture, because we do believe that we're children of God, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we believe that we have a divine destiny. And so there's that. But the other thing that is part of our culture, I think, is that you're never good enough.
Right.
Right? And that you don't measure up. But you can't have one without the other.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third thing is being able to delay gratification, right? I mean, we go to school, we're highly educated. You think about it, you spend, say 4 years in an undergraduate, you might go to graduate school. I mean, I got a PhD.
Mm-hmm.
That took a long time. That preparation for what was happening took a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And some people like to shortcut that.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think shortcuts work.
Right.
Right? I mean, and so the advice I'd give is take the time to prepare yourself. Luck favors the prepared mind. But then listen to the inspiration that you get, right? And that's critical. That's something I learned as a missionary, to rely on the Spirit. And I think opportunities come, and then we have a feeling about whether those opportunities are good for us. And some of those may shortchange our education, but we know that they're the right choices, right? But I think that you really need to take advantage of those opportunities that come to you, and you never know, what. I think God has a plan for us.
Totally. Yeah.
Right, and I think that's something that we need to realize as individuals, and we need to learn to recognize those opportunities. The more we listen to that Spirit. It's interesting here at BYU Hawaii, right? I mean, you hear this thing about the spirit of aloha, right?
Right.
But we know that as something deeper.
Right, for sure.
Right, and I think that's something that you can't forget. The world may not see things the same way, but I think that we're blessed in many ways.
Yeah, for sure.
That doesn't mean that we're always going to be led to riches, but that which makes a good life is always enhanced by that.
Right. For you, I feel like a lot of people, when they talk about being an entrepreneur, because it's definitely not for everybody, but I've heard people say like, it would take so much of my time, I would have less time to be with my family, so some people take traditional jobs. For you, did you ever feel that way, that you had to sacrifice that, or how did you kind of manage your professional career and your family balance?
That's a difficult thing. It really is. But it's. I think that what helps you is understanding what you can do and what you can't. But yeah, that's a difficult problem.
Right.
And if you gain the whole world, then everything else fell apart, right? But I think we're led. We can't let those things, those troubles that we have in our lives, affect the way we look at things.
For sure. For you, what might be maybe your favorite thing about being an entrepreneur and having done your own business versus working for a company?
I think there's a satisfaction in, you think about it. If you can look back and say, I changed the world in some way, I mean, there's a lot of gratification to that.
Right.
We had a saying in our company that said that we would change the way you think about collateral. And I still remember our client conference when Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac had come to our conference, and they had announced at that conference that they would no longer accept loans that did not have the data attached to the appraisal and that did not go through their scoring system. And I just sat back there and thought, you know what? We changed this industry. It's different today than it was before we came along.
Right.
And there's a certain satisfaction to that, right? Can everybody change the world? I think we can in our own ways, right?
Definitely, yeah.
And you do have to have this belief that it can happen. And I think that's something that we need to remember.
Totally. Well, John, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today about entrepreneurship. For everyone, you can tune in next week to our entrepreneurship podcast, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.